Sorry, just a little technical hitch. My name's Glenys Wilmot, and I'm an MEP, a UK MEP, and I've worked closely on this issue for a long, long time. So I'm delighted that you're all here. It's good to see you all, and I'm really pleased that I'm able to host this conference with SIOP Europe for the 5th year in a row to mark International Childhood Cancer Awareness Day. And I'm really pleased that this year we're focusing on the Paediatrics Medicines Regulation, such an important topic. We know it's not working in the way that we would hope, and so it's really important that we have that review next year. But I'd like to start by thanking Professor Gilles Vassal, who is finishing his term as President of SIOP. I've worked closely with Gilles for a number of years, and his support and expert advice have been invaluable to me. Gilles, it's been an honour to work with you. I'd like to wish you all the best for the future, although I know you'll be continuing to work with SIOP, and I'm sure this won't be the last time we'll see each other. I'm sure of that. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome SIOP's new president, Professor Martin Schrapp. I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job, and I look forward to building a constructive and cooperative relationship with you as I've had with you. We've certainly got some very important work to be getting on with, not least working to ensure that children with cancer have access to life-saving treatments. I'd like to start with the facts, and unfortunately the facts are that cancer is still the leading cause of death by disease for children in Europe, that every year 35,000 children and adolescents are diagnosed with cancer. I'll say that again, 35,000, and 6,000 of them don't survive. While of those that do survive, 2/3 will experience side effects related to their treatment. And the problem is that most childhood cancers are rare, and in many cases no treatment exists. The great strides we've seen over the last decades in treatments for adult cancer simply haven't been seen for paediatric cancers. For many children with cancer, the only option might be to receive experimental treatment or medicines off-label, while for others a clinical trial might be their only chance of survival. Where treatments do exist, they often cause serious side effects which can affect a patient for the rest of their life. But paediatric testing is costly and difficult, and of course there are many ethical issues to consider when it comes to testing medicines in children. And because most childhood illnesses are rare, many pharmaceutical companies don't see this as an area as profitable and are reluctant to invest in research. And that's what really we're here to talk about today, a really, really important issue. We need to do more to incentivise pharmaceutical companies to develop new medicines, specifically for children. The EU's Paediatric Medicines Regulation aims to do this by requiring companies to draw up Paediatric Investigation Plan, that's the PIP, the PIP, for every new medicine they develop. And we can't deny it's had some success. But the truth is that since the legislation came into force, only one new paediatric oncology drug has been developed, and that's just not good enough. When it comes to cancer, part of the problem is that companies can apply for PIP waivers if their medicine is intended to treat a disease that doesn't occur in children. Most adult cancers don't occur in children, and likewise, most paediatric cancers don't occur in adults. But that doesn't mean that a drug to treat an adult cancer couldn't be effective in children, and that's the issue. We ought to look at how the medicine works, not simply the type of cancer. It's also just outrageous that a promising trial in children could be stopped because the developers weren't seeing the results they wanted to in adults. How do you actually tell a child with cancer that a medicine exists that could help them, but they just can't have it? And how do you tell a child who's been feeling better thanks to taking part in a trial that they have to end their treatment because the developer doesn't want to continue? The paediatric regulation is due to be reviewed next year in 2017. I'd like to see that done much more quickly, earlier, but we can at the very least start working now to ensure that when the review does happen, we get the changes that are necessary, the changes we need. I know everyone wants to hear the same thing, to ensure that the treatments are available to give children with cancer the best chance possible of surviving into adulthood with a good quality of life. We have an opportunity in 2017 to bring about changes that could really make a difference to the lives of children with cancer. It's an opportunity we can't miss. So now I'm going to hand over to President of SIOP, Martin Schrapp. Before I do, can I just say one thing? I've just remembered I was supposed to say it. We have two colleagues from EMA joining us on Skype. Over there, look, you may be able to see them. We've got Geordie Linares and Ralph Harold. Thank you and welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you can see us, they're waving to us for those of you who can't see. So now I'm going to hand over to Martin. We're waving back.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much, Glenis. I will be very brief. The most important thing is to thank you personally, because you're one of the driving forces for the ICCD, the International Childhood Cancer Day, over many years. And the agenda that has been set up for today is very focused. It could be a very general one, but it's a focused one. And that's what I really appreciate, because we are not here to hear the same stories again, but we want to see the agenda moving forward. And I think you already made very essential statements, and I'm looking forward to a program in which these points will be raised, discussed, and where we see the perspective that in the long run, not the long run, the very recent, in the very near future, we will see results of this agenda. So I'm very glad about your initiative. I hope we will move it forward also in the European executive branch, not only in the Parliament, because we need some action. And we have action people here. We have action people on the stage. We have action people in the speaker round and also here in the audience. I'm very thankful for you to come, to make the effort to come here. I thank all of us, all of those who have organized this event, because it's also a big effort. I thank our colleagues from the EMA to have joined. I know you have another meeting going on, so it's not so easy. And now I would give it back to you, because you will probably introduce our three speakers in the first part. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Martin. Just to let you know what's happening, this is broken into two parts. I will be chairing the first part, Martin will be chairing the second part. The first part of our discussions are proposals from the multi-stakeholder paediatric cancer community. And our first speaker is someone I met recently, and that's Chris Copeland from Unite to Cure. In 2010, sadly, Chris's daughter Bethan died of Ewing's sarcoma, and she was only 16. Since then, Chris has been an active campaigner for better access to treatment for children and young people with cancer. He's a parent representative at the National Cancer Research Institute in the UK, serving on the Children's Cancer Clinical Studies Group, and is also a founder member of Unite to Cure, a network of groups and individuals from across Europe campaigning for better treatment for paediatric cancer. For those of you who've seen me before and who know me, I always think it's so important to hear the voice of patients and patients' parents, those people who've been affected. So I'm delighted that Chris is here today. Chris.
Thank you, Glenis. Glenis I'm very pleased, has taken away the first page of my notes, which gives me a little bit more time to talk, so I'm pleased with that. I have about 10 minutes to talk to you about the perspective of parents and families and survivors. As Glenis has said, I am here speaking as an individual, but I'm also speaking on behalf of other people. I'm speaking on behalf of our network of parents and families and supporters across Europe, which we've recently established. And I feel a heavy sense of responsibility, because I'm speaking for a lot of very capable, hard-working people who all have difficult stories to tell. I'm also here as a member of the Cancer Drugs Development Forum. We've been working very hard for the past 2 or 3 years in various working groups, researchers, oncologists, people from the pharmaceutical industry, the regulators, and we've been trying to build a consensus for making the context of the paediatric medicines regulation to make it more effective for children with cancer. And we have a package to present to you today. Unite to Cure is generally about a better deal for young people with cancer, but today we've got a specific set of proposals that we want to put before you. I'm a layperson, and my background is language, so I'm going to try and talk to you in plain English. I apologise, I can't speak to you in plain French or plain German. And I'll be speaking about some specific legal and medical issues, but I'll try to talk to you in simple terms about them. As Glenys said, all of the work I do is in memory of my lovely daughter Bethan. She would have been 21 this year, and I'm going to read out to you her birthday card now. Childhood cancer is one of the untold stories of our generation. Some people do not actually realise that children get cancer, and many people try to forget or avoid that issue, I think understandably, and I think I did until I couldn't avoid the issue. Many people, I think probably most of us, do not understand that as a community we invest more money, more time and more effort in developing anti-cancer treatments for adults than we do for children. And when people learn that, they are somewhat shocked, particularly when you go back to the statistics which Glenys has given us and which has been repeated many times. The most common cause of death by disease is cancer in young people. So it is central to young people's health. And it's getting on for 10 years ago now that the Paediatric Medicines Regulation came in, which was one of the ways of addressing that issue. The regulation is not just about cancer. We sometimes forget that. It's about young people's illnesses generally. But it has a central relevance to oncology. And as Glenys has told us, but maybe just to repeat the script again, the basic premise of the PMR is that industry must screen every new adult product they develop for its potential in treatment of children. Very, very straightforward aim. And where feasible, they should develop a paediatric investigation plan. And I'm trying to read that out clearly because over the next half hour, people will keep talking about PIPs. The first CDDF conference I went to, I kept on hearing peeps, 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 and I didn't have a clue what people were talking about. So it's an investigation, a trial to understand the relevance of a new drug to the paediatric community. We're getting on for 10 years of the PMR now, and there is clear evidence of success for generating new treatments for children generally. But unfortunately, children with cancer have been left out of this success story. There's a lot we could say about why that has happened. The big issue that we constantly return to is waivers. The repeated and continual waivers of paediatric investigation plans, particularly with relation to children's cancers. I'm not going to talk to you about why that happens or what we can do about that. My colleague, Professor Vassal, will talk about that in about 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll leave him to talk about that central issue. And he'll be talking about how we can tighten the loophole that exists with waivers. With our group of stakeholders here from the CDDF, we're trying to bring to you a balanced package. Professor Vassal will talk about tightening up regulation, the requirements. I want to talk to you about incentives. I want to talk to you about the soft side and the way that we can put a hand out to our colleagues in the pharmaceutical industry to help them to build a business case for building a brighter future for our children. Okay, let's just go into some simple technicalities. The current incentive, the current reward that we have within the PMR for developing a PIP is that a pharmaceutical company will get a 6-month extension of patent for the equivalent drug with use in adults. That may seem technical, but if you think about it, an extension of patent is in essence an extension of monopoly of that drug. And therefore the company can charge premium prices for 6 months. And within that industry, we're talking about very big sums of money. However, with cancers, completing a paediatric plan can take over 10 years, and particularly with small biotechs, investment over that timescale is not often considered viable or sufficiently attractive. As my colleague, Professor Pam Kearns, was saying last week, the balance between the level of investment needed to deliver a PIP and the financial reward is not proving sufficiently attractive for rare illnesses such as cancer, and the focus here is on cancers. Pam has chaired a working group looking into incentives, and I've been one of the members of that group, and we want to bring to you just two simple aspects of the incentives that we'd like to develop for the pharmaceutical industry that we think will make a change. And I'm going to talk to you about, I'm not going to talk to you about making greater rewards, I'm going to talk to you about smarter, more flexible rewards. We're not talking about spending about greater sums of money, but using it more effectively. So I'll talk to you firstly, very briefly, about staging rewards, and then I'll talk to you about making rewards more flexible. Firstly, staging rewards. What we want to do is to offer the industry a reward at an earlier stage, to encourage the biotechs and pharma to get the PIP started, but also to stage the rewards that are given, so that a company is not waiting 10 years or more for that reward. What we will say is if a company completes the first step of a PIP and demonstrates that that piece of science is viable, they will get 2 months extension of the patent, which they'll be able to use in a relatively short time. Secondly, we're talking about more flexible rewards. And here we've spent a lot of time talking to our transatlantic colleagues. We've been talking to people behind the Creating Hope Act in the United States. And the CHA offers what they call a transferable voucher in return for paediatric drug development. If you think about it, it's a bit like a Pokemon card. You know, you exchange them in the playground. And what we are looking at is developing something similar with the patent extensions. And what we're talking about is, in certain circumstances, the patent extension could be transferred to a different drug. I know it's getting a little bit technical and perhaps a little bit difficult to explain. If I can give you an example, perhaps an example that's telling for my history. When my daughter went into relapse and we had our very difficult talk with our consultant, one of the first things I said to him was, you and I have been at the same conference, and there's been this talk about IGF-1R, a new drug which was showing promise for Ewing sarcoma. And I was saying, is it possible to get Bethan onto a trial for IGF-1R? There will be a lot of brave talk today about innovation and about advance and so on. I spend a lot of time at conferences hearing the bright news, but just to put you in the picture of somebody who's been through this, in the last year of my daughter's life, we were not offered a single trial. We were offered palliative care. There was nothing available whatsoever. The interesting but difficult irony for me is at the same time, in fact, a paediatric investigation plan had been started into IGF-1R. Now, this is not a miracle cure. It's not what the Daily Mail loves to have headlines about, miracle cure for cancer. But it does show significant potential. The PIP was being run in parallel with an investigation into the relevance of IGF-1R for adult lung cancer. When the drug company discovered that the investigations into lung cancer were inconclusive, they stopped those. Because the adult trial had been stopped, the tandem paediatric trial was also stopped, even though it showed scientific promise. Now, as a parent, my reaction to that is I would like to go and kick down the door of whoever made that decision. But that's not going to change anything. What Pam and her group have been talking about is a way to open that door. And it's a simple process. In that circumstance, the lung cancer trial is going nowhere. We therefore have the transferable voucher. And the 4 months patent extension can be transferred to another drug in the company's portfolio if they continue with the paediatric plan. It's a lifeline for keeping those trials open. And by extension, what it does is uncouple the difficult irony of research at the moment is we always couple paediatric research to adult research. It's a kind of afterthought. With that kind of transferable voucher, a drug company can simply look at a paediatric drug and a paediatric molecular target. And whether this is relevant to adults or not, that 4-month extension is a possibility. It won't solve the problem, but I was listening to one of my colleagues from Pharma last week, and he was saying this would open a door. This would allow me to go and speak to the accountants, and this would give me something to negotiate. I could say I've got a science case, but I've got a business case too. So it's starting a process. These are some examples of the kinds of package that we're looking at. We're trying to look at both sides of the picture. We're trying to present a balanced case. And can I say, I've been with this for 2 years, and I came back from the conference in very much two minds last week. It's not an easy process. The CDDF involves a kind of alliance between people like myself. It's putting together very unlikely bedfellows. So it's families with pharma. It's researchers with regulators. They're often a very fractious relationship. What we've brought to you today is a common platform. We're all presenting the same case to you. You'll be hearing from Raphael Rousseau, my colleague along the table here. And I'd like to pay tribute because Raphael represents one of the biggest pharma companies on earth. And he's here to argue the case for tighter regulation of the pharmaceutical industry. But he's doing that on the basis that he's insisting that it's practical, that we do it in a method that is good for children, but it's also good for business. It's not easy for us to get along. I'm sure there's been occasions when Professor Vassal would like to have strangled me. But that doesn't matter, because we are here with a common case. And now it's your turn. We're speaking to the politicians, and we're asking you to support us, to join us, to lead us. We're asking you to take the package that we're presenting to you, take it to the Commission, take it to the Parliament, so my learned colleagues here can take it back to the laboratory and can take it to the hospital ward, and we can open a door for a better story, perhaps not for my children, but for my grandchildren. I've been asked to come here today to celebrate Awareness Day. I've done a lot of awareness days. I've done the bake sales. I've done the wristbands. I've done the websites. I've done the A4 posters. And frankly, I'm sick to death of awareness days. I'd like to ask you to join me in 2016 as a year of action. We've known about this problem for a long time. This year is the year to fix this problem and to open that door so that the difficult story that I have is not for families in the future. Okay, I'm done. I think there's a few minutes for questions. You may like to ask about the technicalities. You may like to speak about the general principles. If I can't answer your questions, which probably will be the case, I have many learned people with me.
Okay. Anybody want to ask? We've got a session. The second half of the session is, you know, quite a good discussion too. But have you got any questions to Chris? Anybody? No, not at the moment. Okay. Well, if there's no questions to Chris, we'll move on to our next speaker. Is that on? Yeah, that's on. Move on to our next speaker, Professor Gilles Vassal, as well as his work with SIOP. He's a Professor of Oncology at the University of Paris-Sud and Director of Clinical Research at the Institute Gustave Roussy. I don't know if I said that properly. But, good. And co-founder of the European Academic Consortium for Innovative Therapies for Children with Cancer and of the European Network for Cancer Research in Children and Adolescents. And, you know, he's dedicated his work to the development of new treatments for children and adolescents with cancer. So it'll be very interesting. So, Gilles.
Thank you very much, Glenis. In the next few slides, I would like to share with you the work that has been done during the last 2 years and the concrete proposal that we bring here in the Parliament, then in the Commission, to move this forward and change the environment to accelerate new drug development for children and adolescents with cancer. Okay. The facts. In 2015, as compared to before 2007, when the Paediatric Medicine Regulation was launched, we see a significant change in the environment for new drug development. And this is a positive effect of the regulation. At the moment, there are more than 80 pediatric investigation plans approved in oncology. However, we are far from addressing the needs. At the moment, less than 10%, 1 in 10 children with a non-curable relapsed malignancy have access to innovative therapies in Europe. And this was, again, mentioned by Chris about access to innovative therapies. And we need to change the environment, to change the way we work in order to increase significantly the capacity of those children to have access to innovation. This is why in December 2013, SIOP Europe, ITCC and CDDF proposed to create a multi-stakeholder pediatric oncology platform in order to improve the development of oncology drugs for children and adolescents. The very specificity of this platform is that we do have all stakeholders, parents, patients, researchers, clinicians, people from industry, people from regulatory. And it's a no-blame, no-shame initiative. It's all together, looking at what happened, trying to identify the problems, and trying to find together solutions. And it's truly working. These are the logos of all the people participating into this initiative, from industry, from parents' organization, from academic institutions, from EMA, CDDF, ITCC, and SIOP Europe. Why it's not working as it could be or should be? First, as mentioned by Chris, there are unjustified class waivers. If the condition in adults does not exist in children, the drug can be class waived and the company doesn't have to develop the drug in children. When we looked at 3 years of pediatric committee minutes, we identified that more than 200 class waivers have been issued and 72% of them were in the field of oncology. 89 oncology drugs have been class waived. We are not saying that all these drugs should have been developed. We are just saying that the waiver was issued on the wrong basis for these 89, and we would need to identify the real one to move forward. One example, crizotinib was class waived, a drug for lung cancer. Lung cancer does not exist in children, but the target of crizotinib, ALK, is present in neuroblastoma, lymphoma, sarcoma in children. And we know now that some disease respond to crizotinib. And this is an example of waiving a drug that could be relevant with regard to its mechanism of action for a pediatric malignancy, delayed access to potentially life-saving therapy in children. Second reason, there are still major delays. This is a concrete example. 2 drugs, nivolumab and pembrolizumab, inhibitors of PD-1, checkpoint inhibitor, immunotherapy, and you know that these drugs are currently changing treatment for adult cancer, especially melanoma, but also lung cancer. This figure shows the time of development in yellow in adults and the start of development in children in blue. And as you can see for both drugs, the black bullet, both drugs were approved for marketing in melanoma in adults in 2014, but the development in children started after. And if you look at the star, which is the time the pediatric investigation plan was approved for both drugs, but the European Medicine Agency, it was early in March 2014. But the regulation says a pediatric investigation plan should be submitted to the EMA at the end of the early phase 1 pharmacological studies in adults. So this is an illustration of, despite the regulation, there are still delays in starting the development of new drugs in children, happening after marketing authorization, while it should have been considered earlier. And lastly, some of the approved PID are unfeasible. One example, vemurafenib, a BRAF inhibitor for the treatment of BRAF-mutated melanoma, an approved plan in adolescents with BRAF-mutated metastatic melanoma, a very rare situation. And the company started the trial in January 2011 in 26 investigation sites in 10 countries and 4 continents. But as of December 2015, only 6 adolescents have been recruited. Some pediatric investigation plans are unfeasible, and you can figure out the resources just to try to deliver in this. These are 3 examples showing that there are ways to improve the context of pediatric development in order to tackle this specific issue that I was just mentioning. And our proposal is, first, pediatric development should be based on the drug mechanism of action, which is directly related to the biology of the pediatric malignancy instead of the adult indication. Crizotinib should have been developed from scratch in ALK-positive pediatric malignancies. We do know at the moment that some pharmaceutical companies decide voluntarily to develop their drug outside the indication in adults. But we identify some companies who did not do that with their drug, which were relevant with regard to their mechanism of action for pediatric malignancies. So we propose really to consider mechanism of action, biology, science-driven development in the pediatric setting. The second proposal is prioritization. Because for sure, we are not able and we don't want to study the 1,000 compounds under development currently in adults. And we think there is a need to prioritize drugs, to choose the best compounds to move forward, identify the compound that should not move forward, based on mechanism of action, needs, feasibility, using stronger biological and preclinical data to nourish the decision, but moreover, doing so through cooperation in between pharmas, having often same drugs in their pipelines addressing the same target, with academia, with researchers, and with people from regulatory, in what we call a concept, multi-stakeholder forum, to discuss together the best way to develop a drug, a class of drug, or the best way to address a disease, a rare disease with a lot of drugs to be developed. Prioritization is the second proposal that we put forward. It's not easy, but we think at the moment we need to test that in order to be able, in addition to mechanism of action development plan, to be able to set up prioritization. And finally, as described by Chris, new incentive and new rewards could, in addition, facilitate, better incentivize this development of innovative compounds in the field of pediatric malignancies. In conclusion, we think there is a need for changing the regulation, not killing the regulation, but changing the regulation to make it more effective. There is a need for a change of mindset, and the key point is that pediatric oncology drug development should move from regulatory compliance only, which is most of the time doing what the law prescribes, into research and development, changing the mindset of how drugs should be developed. And at the end, the goal is to accelerate new oncology drug development for children and adolescents with cancer. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Any questions to Professor Vassal? Yes, please.
Yes. Francis Crawley from the Good Clinical Practice Alliance. Gilles, I just want to, one thing we had discussed and I want to mention here too, I think the concentration on the pediatric regulation is good and appropriate, but there also needs to be a concentration on reimbursements. And I think this is a big stumbling block toward getting people to begin their trials even, that they don't have a good way to see forward. So I think that it has to be taken not only in the case at the EMA and the approvals there, but also with the payers, with the different member states, and with the reimbursements there. This has to be something that has to be discussed, I think, alongside the regulation now. We cannot separate these two things because they're too closely related. The second thing is, I do agree with you about the waivers. I think the waivers, the first thing that happened at the EMA, even before they put together PEDCO, was they set out a list of waivers. It was the very first thing they did. Even before PEDCO was established, the very first way, instead of putting forward really a list of drugs or so that they should be focused on. So I think really PEDCO has some work to do. The EMA has some work to do to relook at how they're putting out waivers, even within the current framework of the regulation.
Okay, we're going to see if there's any more questions so that Gilles can take them all together. Is that it? Okay, Gilles.
So your point about having as well at the same time people from HTA and discussing downstream is extremely important. I have to say so far we did not address this because we were concentrating in access to innovative therapies, because we were far away from having a drug approved in the pediatric oncology setting. But you're absolutely right. We need to have them as well around and discussing with us because it's a global issue in adults, and we need to be comprehensive in the pediatric setting.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker in this particular session is Raphael Rousseau from Genitech, which is part of the Roche Group. Raphael is Group Medical Director of the Innovative Paediatric Drug Development Group and chairs the Development Review Committee for Paediatric Oncology and oversees Roche's paediatric strategy. He's been previously Professor of Medical and Paediatric Oncology at the University Claude Bernard in Lyon, France. From 1998 to 2005 was a research and clinical fellow at Texas Children's Cancer Center. Sorry, my voice is failing. And the Center for Cell and Gene Therapy, Baylor College of Medicine, USA. 2005 to 2009, he was coordinator of Child Hope European Consortium, dedicated to the immune treatment of childhood acute leukemia, permanent expert for biomedical research in the French Agency for Safety of Medicinal Products, and in 2008 awarded the Cancer Foundation Advanced Clinical Research Award in sarcoma from the American Society of Clinical Oncology. That's quite a billing, I've got to say. So, would you like to speak to us now? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here to report that we've made progress, even from the industry side. I have a disclaimer to make. The talk is about industry perspective, but I will bring you more perspective from my group. I cannot speak from all my colleagues, but I hope that by showing to you and to them what we've achieved in collaboration with our academic colleagues, parents and regulators, there is room for improvement that colleagues in industry could think about to accelerate the development of new drugs, not only drugs that are being developed for adults, but ultimately develop new drugs for children. So we're not there yet, but I think we've made some progress. And I think we've really come from the view that children should not be protected from research, but through research. This does not come from me, but a workshop that took place at FDA earlier last year. And really, I think this is what should drive us. We should not limit the opportunities for children under ethical consideration, of course, to access those new drugs. But this is probably a big part of the mindset that has prevented industry, not only the financial aspect, but also the lack of knowledge of the particularities of children with rare diseases. So now that many pediatricians are moving to industry, I think this is where we're getting to the point where knowledge and expertise in pediatrics is reaching that part of the bridge. So just wanted to give you a few elements of the challenge that we're facing as a group, not only in industry, but as researchers in the pediatric field. This is a very well-known publication, a recent publication on the numbers of mutation in the different cancers, and it's a little bit small, but on the right-hand side of the slide, You see that the little dots are very high. Those are adult cancers that present a lot of what we call somatic mutations, and those mutations is what we target when we develop those new targeted drugs. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see a number of pediatric tumors, and as you can see, the dots are lower, meaning that there are less mutations. And so in general, and that's maybe a pessimistic message, but I want to point out that children and their tumors are going to be less amenable to targeted therapies. Now, that doesn't mean that this is not going to work, but we also have to accept that there is an intrinsic challenge with pediatric tumors, that the so-called targeted therapies may not always work as well. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but that's a challenge. Now, as I said, pediatric cancers are different, but not always, and this is the example of the ALK inhibitors. On top of the red arrow, adult tumors that have been shown to have ALK mutation, so a gene that drives the development of cancer cells, and below the arrow, example of pediatric tumors that have been shown to harbor this type of mutation. So clearly, targeted therapies could work in children, provided that we test those drugs in children. And as Professor Vassal explained, some companies did not decide to volunteer their pediatric in a pediatric opportunity. Others did, and this is what we need to change. If there is science backing the fact that a mutation exists in a pediatric tumor, and if we have a drug that we can use, then we should use it. Now, the question is, how can we do that? Is that through incentives? Is that through obligation? And that's what we'll be discussing. The other challenge that we face is that pediatric tumors are rare, and there are distinct entities from the one that are found in adults. So here you see a number of pediatric tumors. Their number are small. 70% or more of children will be cured with first-line treatment. And so if you think about the risk-benefit of exposing children to potentially harmful drugs, that leaves us with the children with relapsed refractory diseases, which is, by nature, small. And so that's another challenge for researchers in academia and in industry, is that we're addressing a small group of patients, rare diseases. So if you want to find meaningful information and back it up with solid statistics, you're already seeing that this is a challenge. Finding the number of patients needed to run those statistically meaningful trials is always going to be a challenge. But again, this is what we've been doing for 40 years in pediatric research, and I think that shouldn't be a showstopper for industry to consider testing their drugs in children with cancer. One way to do this is to look at the mechanism of action of the drug, not look specifically at the name of the tumor and whether it corresponds between adult and children, but look at all those tumors that may harbor the same defect and enroll those children with different tumor types, but the same biology and the same target in the same trial. So as opposed to the way that we used to do with vemurafenib, for instance, where we targeted only one type of tumor, the one that corresponds in adults, melanoma, we're now looking at trials where we should enroll all the tumors that harbor the BRAF mutation, for example, and treat them with the same type of drug. And this is what a number of companies are doing now, not only Roche. So this is the example of our portfolio, and the question is, with so many drugs in oncology, how do we develop such a rich pipeline in such a rare disease population? And on the left-hand side, orange and green are the number of drugs that are now either accessible on market or have reached phase 3 or entered phase 3 in adults, and the green ones are the ones for which we have a pediatric program ongoing, and some of those drugs do not carry any obligations from a regulatory standpoint, but we nonetheless decided to bring them to the pediatric community because the science backs it up. And so there's no reason to withhold those drugs from research in children if indeed the science supports it. In orange, those are the drugs that do not have a pediatric plan, and that doesn't mean that we haven't explored them from a preclinical standpoint, but there was no justification from a scientific standpoint. And some of those drugs have even been tested for some information in pediatrics, but did not go beyond phase 1 because they simply did not work in children. So that's giving a chance for children to be exposed to drugs based on the science and really giving them the same chances as with adults. On the right-hand side, you've got some drugs in blue that are promising in the adult space that have not yet entered phase 3, but for which we have already started pediatric investigation for the ones that we think have a scientific background that supports targeting some pediatric tumors. So this is a rich pipeline, and it's probably the richest in oncology, and despite the fact that we are addressing rare pediatric types, tumor types, we feel that there is a way forward in using those drugs in collaboration with our academic colleagues in children with rare cancer. So we really need some paradigm shifts urgently. We need to move away from a regulatory-based approach. If a disease does not exist in children, if a disease exists in adults but not in children, then waivers are applied. We think it's the wrong way to go. And so we're supportive of modification of the pediatric regulation that looks at the mechanism of action of the drug. But as you mentioned, we need a prioritization because we will be faced with a tsunami of programs. If there are too many drugs and, fortunately enough, not enough patients, how are we going to drive this research? So we need some prioritization, either at the preclinical level or after phase 1. Companies should be able to sit down around the table with the results of their pediatric investigation and discuss them in an open and transparent way so that we pick the best drug for those children. We need, therefore, to look at a portfolio of drugs rather than one drug in one isolated company. And we need to think of innovative trial design so that we don't overexpose children with rare diseases to drugs that ultimately will not work. So we need to agree with academics, regulators, parents, and colleagues from industry what are the endpoints that really truly will be meaningful and validated so that we can decide which drug to move forward and which drug to put potentially on the back burner, despite the fact that we will have already collected a little bit of information, but maybe we don't need the 5 drugs that are of the same class that are used in adults for children. Maybe 2 would suffice. And if you think that, if you agree with me that the patients are rare, then that's probably what we need to do. So what we've developed with our colleagues from academia, ITCC in Europe and Paediatric in the United States, is a innovative trial design called iMatrix, which is, rather than testing the drug in one disease in children, is looking specifically at the specificities of the pediatric tumor types. And for all the tumor types that harbor the same defect, molecular defect, or the same target from an immune standpoint, use the drug and expose children in phase 1 and phase 2 with different tumor types. So, for instance, we've just opened an arm of that trial with a drug called atezolizumab, which is a PD-L1 inhibitor. And I just want to say that this drug is not yet approved in adults, nor do we have an obligation to develop it in children. But because of the science and because we discussed this with our academic colleagues, we are convinced that this drug has a potential in children. And so we've moved it as early as we could, so we can always do better in terms of timing. But at least this is before the drug is even approved and is now in phase 1 in children aged 0 to 30 years. So we're giving the drug to adolescents and young adults because young adults do relapse with pediatric tumor types. And if they can't access a phase 1 trial in adults, then they have no opportunities as well. So adolescents and young adults are included in this trial. And this is now open in 40 sites across Europe and the United States. And in 8 weeks, we've enrolled 20 patients. So by offering access to children with different tumor types, not only do we serve the needs of children, but we also make things more feasible for companies and academic centers to recruit those patients rather than focusing on a disease that will only recruit 6 patients over 6 years. So we're doing this now for this drug. As a matter of fact, we've opened to tumor types that have not yet been explored in adults. So I'm happy to report that 2 cases of adolescents with Hodgkin lymphoma have had access to the drug before their adult counterparts even had access to the drug. So I think we do make progress. So with this, we want to move forward the drug in a way that respects the safety of children. So we want to preserve and match those rare children to the best available therapies, and we use criteria to rapidly stop the development of the drug if we don't have efficacy, but at the same time we don't want to stop too early. So we're working very closely with health authorities, EMA and FDA, and I really thank them for their support to their approach so that we can design together the inclusion-exclusion criteria, the stopping rules, so that we don't lose a chance to use a new drug in children. We don't want to stop the development too early and for wrong reasons. At the same time, we want to be cautious about exposing children at a much earlier time point than what we've done in the past. A second drug will be added, a MEK inhibitor, will be added in the coming weeks, and we hope to add about a drug or two per year on that platform, depending on the availability of the drug, on the availability of a pediatric formulation, and the availability of preclinical data to support the science behind this approach. So I want to thank our academic colleagues, the regulators for their flexibility in setting up this platform, and of course the parents for agreeing to have their children participate to these trials. So again, 20 patients in 8 weeks, I think is pretty remarkable. So I want to talk about incentives and give you the perspective from industry. So for large companies, investing at risk on a pediatric program where there is basically no market is difficult, but is something that we can do. For small companies, investing a number of millions of dollars on a pediatric program with an incentive that's going to come 10 years down the line is much more difficult. And here is an illustration of the problem. You've got a number of years where your cash flow is basically negative, where you're spending money on your research program, and you start getting back money when the drug is made available, commercially available to the adult patients. And this is where you start seeing those green areas of money coming back to the bank account of the company. And so you can imagine that this is difficult for smaller companies, but also for big ones who have a lot of drugs to develop, to invest at risk when they see that the reward may come at the very end of the program. So we need to think about incentives, and it's not about making money, because here clearly there is no market, but at least making sure that we have enough money to invest in developing the programs that are needed for children. And quite frankly, those programs are as expensive as for adult drug development. So there's no reason to lowball the investment in children. So when you realize that the development of a drug takes about 10 years and more than $1 billion, you can certainly imagine that the investment that we do in pediatrics need to be substantive. So where do we put those rewards? And I think the proposals from the working group are very interesting, bringing some flexibility and some transferability of those extension will certainly help, hopefully, my colleagues in industry to do what's right for children. So with this, I'd like to conclude that, yes, we are supportive of a mechanism of action-based approach to pediatric regulation. I wouldn't call it tighter regulation, Chris. I think those are more intelligent regulation. I think the PDCO and the EMA did a great job a number of years ago to design the pediatric regulation, but you don't know what you don't know, and at that time it was difficult to envision the challenges that I've explained to you. So I think it's now time to revise the regulation. I hope that I've shown you that there are ways to accelerate the development of the drugs in a way that's cost-effective, despite this mechanism of action-based approach. We need to have a prioritization, because if we open the floodgates of more drugs to be accessible to children, fortunately enough, we won't have more patients available. The pediatric tumors are rare. So we need to prioritize either from preclinical models in animals or in vitro or after phase 1. And so we're talking with our regulatory colleagues at the EMA and FDA to have a prioritization forum where companies, academics, and parents can sit together, look at the data, and decide what is the best drug to move forward. And finally, those rewards is not to make us rich, it's to make the system sustainable, because at the end, again, we're talking about bringing adult drugs to pediatrics, but ultimately what we would like to do in an area where there is no market, we'd like to create a circle of virtue where the sustainability that we established by when developing adult drugs could serve the needs of the pediatric drugs specifically for children. So I think if we do a good job at being sustainable and make the system work for a majority of companies, then I think we'll see more pediatric research. So with this, I hope that I've shown you that we've made some progress. This is indeed a year of action, and I hope that I've convinced my colleagues across industry that this is doable and that we can work together to make this happen and do now what children need next. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael. Any questions? Yes, please.
Francis Crowley again, with apologies. I was also the ethics on the Ethics Advisory Committee for ENCA. Thank you, Raphael. I think it's very good, and I think it's very promising, too, to see what Roche and I think other companies are doing to try to accelerate their place inside of the pediatric investigations. And I also think it's not easy. It hasn't been easy for Europe either, because it's really only less than 10 years when we put together all of these mechanisms, and it's very complicated to do. Just from the ethics perspective, what you quoted from the U.S. meeting, I suppose, there, children should not be protected from research, but rather through research. I think that's good, but it would be better to take out the but and put and. So children should be protected from research and through research. We need the two things together, and it's a really important way to think about it as well. The other thing is, with regard to incentives or obligations, I think it has to be, again, with the coordinating conjunction, sorry, but obligations and incentives. They have to go together. And I think one of the weaknesses is not so much the pediatric regulation itself, but the implementation of it, the use of it. There hasn't been enough force behind the obligations. It's been more force behind the incentives, I believe, in some cases. And, for example, with regard to the waivers, as you mentioned here, the waivers, disease in children, disease in adults, but not the same disease in children. But the regulation was rather carefully written. It doesn't reflect necessarily to the disease itself. It could be a disease, it could be a drug for heart disease in adults, but it could be something that might be useful for oncology in children. And still the waivers are being given on the basis of disease, and that's really not the incentive there. So I'd like to make just two suggestions, really. One is, just to think about, one is, could there be a way for researchers and patients or patients working together to petition to have a pediatric investigation plan when they see, because now all of the drug development is open, when they see that that these drugs are taking place, could they have a way to petition to the PEDCO or somehow to say, we'd like to set up a pediatric investigation plan in this drug because we see an area where it could be useful. And the second thing, I still come back to the HTAs here, because you mentioned it's very difficult to make an investment when you see that your return is 10 years or further down the road here. So I think there needs to be more public money involved in this too. Somehow we have to make a connection between public money involved in this and where we need the convincing is with the HTAs. They have to understand it's cheaper to do research on disease than it is to treat disease. And this is what we have to understand.
Okay, thank you. Kevin.
Right, thank you very much to Raphael for his speech. Couple of points. I noticed in one of your slides you had the year that of the adult phase 3 trials and not the year of the adult phase 1 trials. One of the things that's always baffled me with pharma is that ever since the paediatric regulation came in, there is nothing to stop pharma offering their latest oncology drugs, or any drugs for that matter, at the end of a successful phase 1 in adults, under an MTA and for responsible research. And yet this is never done. There's no regulation saying that you can't do it. It could be done. You could make the drugs available. And we certainly know
from the work that we've funded. You know, juvenile animal studies in preclinical trials take a long time, and yet often the drugs are waived, and then they're kept away from the paediatric researchers. Now, I have a worry that as we move forward, and I fully applaud you for your stance on this, and I hope you have the full backing all the way up to the top in Roche. Mm-hmm. But I'm worried that the goodwill that perhaps Roche is showing is not being shown in other companies. And at the moment, it may be that they may be saying one thing, but in reality they're quite happy with the current paediatric regulation and don't want to change.
Okay. Thank you, Raphael. You're going to have to be fairly...
So you do have a point that in the start of pediatric investigation is usually late, but one reason for this is the funding. As I showed you, investing is always really tight, many drugs, limited amount of budget. So convincing our colleagues from early development is one thing. I can speak for my company. We now start investigation much earlier in the preclinical space, pediatric formulation, juvenile toxicity, once we have a signal following phase 1 studies in adults. We don't do this for every drug. Again, this is based on our discussion with our academic colleagues and researchers, but we try to, and the atezolizumab example is such. We started the development of the pediatric program once we had the phase 1 data in children. And I know several other companies are doing the same. They're even giving the drugs outside of a PIP. So they don't wait for the PIP to be approved or even written to give it to academic researchers. So what we're trying to do is to lead by example and generate the circle of virtue. I agree with you that in an ideal world we should start things much earlier, and I think we are starting to do that, and it's going to get better, but we need to start somewhere. Progress, I think.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm now going to hand over to Martin. Sorry we're running a bit late, but we started a little late. Okay, Martin.
Thanks, Glenis. This is no problem at all because we are already in the middle of the discussion. I would like to invite the speakers of the roundtable up on the podium so that we can really address all of your questions. And while you are moving, I would like to ask my first question actually to one of the people who are not sitting on the podium but sitting a few hundred kilometers away in London, if I'm correct. To hear Jordi Linares from the EMA to listen. Oh, no, we see you even on the big screen. Yeah. Fantastic. To hear your comments on the statements that we just have heard over the last 40 minutes regarding the improvements, potential improvements of the pediatric medical regulation. Can we hear you?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to represent the European Medicines Agency here in this event. I think it's a great pleasure from us to be here. And I'm here with also Dr. Rob Hell, which is in fact the leader of pediatric oncology here at the agency. I mean, there has been many things said, and I think we agree on the basics of what has been said, but I would like really to start by elaborating how we work and what is the really role of the pediatric committee here at the agency. Been something about pediatric investigation plans. Yes, this is what we agree, and it's a tool we have from the pediatric committee then where it puts together the pediatric development agreed with the company. But this research and development program is required from pharmaceutical companies. We have to take into account that there's always the initiative of a pharmaceutical company, the one that will get the discussion here at the agency. The obligations for the pediatric research are in the context of the regulatory submissions from a company. and therefore they are linked to the adult indication by the regulation as proposed by the applicant. In this context, the condition determines the medical framework in which we can really discuss at the pediatric committee level and where we can really require research and development for a medicine for children. We know that in anti-cancer medicines, many malignant conditions have not really matched with, in terms of adult and children. And that is where we have seen some problems. So we can suggest but not impose pediatric studies in diseases when the primary development proposed has not really matched with the adult disease. So we are conscious of this limitation, and that has generated a lot of discussion here at the agency, at the pediatric committee, and we are really to look into the medicine's pharmacology, pharmacological property, and we can suggest studies that are relevant or warranted in other cancers, but we cannot really impose them in terms of the pediatric development plan. We have been hearing quite a lot about the approach according to the mechanism of action or the interest for development in children. That's something that we would like to do, but we don't have the regulatory tools to do that. So if we do that, we'll end up in court, basically, and that's not something we want to do. But it was said also, and we agree that, still companies can submit voluntary PAPs, and those have been proposed by companies to develop medicines in diseases that affect children and that are different from adults. And that has been done. I think the number is about 15 PAPs in oncology on that. And that's very welcome. But again, this is the initiative from companies. We can suggest, we can have early dialogue with companies. We can try to, discuss even with academics in platforms, but we cannot really impose those developments. And once they are completed, these PAPs will be eligible for incentives as the non-voluntary imposed ones, 6-month patent extension or additional 2-year market exclusivity in case of orphan drugs. So that is the situation. There's been also quite a lot, and I think positive messages about how the pediatric regulation is delivering. We need to confirm that really this is the case. There's data showing that the pediatric regulation has had a significant positive effect on pediatric drug development. The pediatric needs are really systematically considered and integrated into medicine developments, and all stakeholders agree on this point. We've also seen quite an increase in activity in pediatric clinical trials. I think we have around 350 per year initiated in Europe, which is a big number. And also, we are happy that there's more and more collaboration of pharmaceutical companies, pediatric research networks, conducting clinical trials. That's really important. And last but not least, I would like to say also that, the discussion that we had about the class waivers, we are conscious about this issue, and we issued, in fact, in August last year, a revision and a revocation of some class waivers in order to try to address the point more from the mechanism of action point of view, again, looking at what are the possibilities for development in that condition, and even trying to go beyond the condition in the same therapeutic area. But I think that there are many things that we can still do, and I would like to finalize with a positive message, looking ahead of what possibilities we have. I think, and we truly support the idea that pharmaceutical companies should really explore mechanisms of action beyond adult indication. And we'll be glad when we have the tools to apply that from a regulatory point of view. We have no problem about that. On the contrary, we welcome that. I would also like to make a point here that has not been made before, that I think we need also to remind ourselves that we need a strong support for basic research on targets, on mechanisms of action, on effects, because we need good candidates for development. It's not only about what do we have in the, coming to the agency, but it's also about what do we understand from the cancers and what good compounds can provide to patients. So that has to be stressed. In terms of incentives, there have been some discussions, and I agree. Without good incentives, obligation will not work. But we have to look at the incentives broadly. I'm happy of the proposal that we have seen about possibility to transfer incentives, stagger incentives. All this can be explored. We have to also focus not only on economic incentives, but also incentives drug research in patients. And finally, well, I think now the new view on the class waivers will contribute us to really have a better target identification of potential for products and facilitate studies in children. I mean, I haven't been involved, but my colleague Rob Harrell has been a bit involved in the discussions on the platforms in order of prioritization, and we are happy to have a dialogue on that and collaborate with the stakeholders. So that would be the message from us. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the statement. And we are sitting here together with all the stakeholders. And I think Chris Copeland made a very important point that there has been progress in the discussion forum that CDDF was organizing, and there were very specific, very clear incentives on the table. So I would like to ask Magda if she could comment. She's the Director of Science Policy of the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, EFPIA, if she thinks that this is realistic to be put on the table and to make, as Chris said, 2016 a year of action.
Thank you very much. Thank you for putting me on the spot, and I would disappoint you because, unfortunately, I would not be able to talk about the proposal that I've just seen a few minutes ago. As you can imagine, FPA representing its members, we need a round of consultation. Now, let me just say one thing. The year of action and the need for collaboration, building on the momentum and doing something shouldn't be empty words. And it's certainly something that FPA is totally and fully subscribing to. So we've seen the various proposals. I could actually, when I was reading what I was supposed to say and what everybody else said, I think we are very much aligned. If I take a few sentences, you would see immediately that we are completely aligned. So the first message that I would like to say is there is certainly a way to reproduce the good example and sharing good practice within the industry. What I heard from Rafael, I couldn't resist to say, FPA is a platform where this type of sharing good practice and discussion about how things can be enabled and improved is certainly a place. So open invitation. The second point, which I heard also in the discussion, is the regulation is delivering. It's never delivering fast enough for parents and children with cancer. So clearly there are some adjustments in terms of implementation and the way the regulation is applied that can be done. We see that there are some weaknesses in this field. So certainly we can do better. And somebody said in the audience, and I'm sorry I picked the sentence but didn't note who said that, going from regulatory compliance to enabling R&D, looking at the regulation in a way that it really enables medicines development and development of medicines for children. This is what we really need to look at together, and FPA and its members are happy to continue working with the platform because it's not new. We already engaged, many of our members have engaged to continue working on that. I would like to pick up on three other points which are absolutely essential in terms of year of action. The first one is about the prioritization. We heard very eloquently from Raphael Rousseau, we actually cannot develop everything at the same time. There would be not enough money, there would be not enough patients, and we would actually spread ourselves thin. This is something that I hear from our pediatrics expert. Prioritization is absolutely essential. What you've suggested in terms of a multi-stakeholder platform that looks at it in collaboration, I think it's absolutely essential as well, and it's certainly an institutional convener that should be in charge of that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about collaboration in terms of multi-drug, multi-arm trials. All of that can be done. That doesn't require necessarily changes in regulation. It just requires changes in practice. It requires more coordination also between the industry and with the academic world. So that's something that we certainly can and should explore. And the example that Raphael shown is certainly something that is leading by example. The next point is that the European Union has a lot of instruments to accelerate things. PRIME, has been mentioned. Adaptive pathways pilots have been mentioned, or haven't been mentioned, but I would like to mention them. All these instruments have to be better explored and exploited in order to accelerate what can be accelerated already today. So we have a framework, we have just to better use that framework as well. And finally, what was said, and again, year of action, so I've already started this year of action, developing better science, better knowledge, what was said by colleagues from EMA and what was said here. We need to understand, if we want to focus on the mode of action, we need to do more research here, and we need to understand better. In the context of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, we have launched this year, last year, a call for a project on preclinical pediatric oncology platform. And this is certainly something that would help us to better understand the science. We need to do more. So in summary, the momentum is here. We are ready to engage. We certainly can and should share good practice. We should look at how to optimize the implementation of the regulation today. We should look at prioritization, at coordination, and at wise use of all the instruments that the European Union is giving us. And finally, in the context of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, we've just started a broader reflection on oncology, and I can assure you that pediatric oncology would be on the table as well.
Thank you very much. This is good to hear. Now, there were already several remarks that academic research also plays a major role in developing this more forward. That's why I would like to ask Pam to comment on that.
Thank you, Martin. I think what's been clear in all the discussions we've had this afternoon is that each of the stakeholders recognises that there's a problem, but I'm not sure we're all perhaps equally aligned on how far forward we are in the solution. And we hear areas of fantastic good practice in Roche, but perhaps not as well developed across all the industry. And the paediatric regulation may well be working for many childhood diseases, but it's absolutely clearly not working in cancer. It's not to say it's not working at all, but it's not working adequately enough. And we all sit in the clinic with families who are looking for new drugs when they've failed the current treatments that we've got, and we look to our adult colleagues in oncology who have a cupboard full of new agents that they can offer both in industry trials and in academic trials. And we don't have that in paediatrics, and it's not because those drugs don't have a scientific basis on which they might work in children. That work is going on. I agree there could be more, but we need access to them. So there are two ways of doing it. We have been doing academic trials in children for decades. We are good at it. We have networks to deliver it. We have the expertise, and it is why where we are today with childhood cancer survival. It's based on the fact that we are good at delivering trials and we are good at recruiting trials. We need to make the next step. If we're going to take into these trials not the decade-old cytotoxic drugs we're familiar with, and bring in the new drugs and deliver trials that answer, are these drugs going to add to survival and not add side effects, then we have to work with the pharmaceutical industry, not just to access the drug, but to be able to deliver the drugs with the right level of data and within the right regulatory framework that can add to the licence, which is what we want. We want these drugs licensed. And I think this is where there is an opportunity. In the paediatric regulation, I personally feel that the early part of it, the safety studies, the so-called phase 1, but I think as we move into design, we have to get rid of this idea of phase 1, phase 2. It's about getting the safety, does this drug work in this disease? Are we hitting the right target? Do that work, and I think that should be driven by pharma and funded by pharma. They're the right people to do it with the right expertise. As we move into can we combine these drugs with our current treatments? Is this actually going to add to survival in frontline and in first relapse, which is where we really want to be curing children up front, not after multiple relapses then have a drug to give them. This is where the partnership with academia needs to happen. Now, the two big challenges we have, one is having a proper understanding between the industry and academia that we can deliver these trials, but we need to raise our game. and also academia needs to understand what we can and can't do, how the finance flows between those things, and a comment that somebody made about where is the public investment. I know in the UK, when I'm a director of a trials unit that does these trials in the adult oncology world, we have enormous problems with using public money for these trials because government money cannot be there to make profit for pharma. I have this said to me in so many contract negotiations with government. And so we have to find a way of being able to support public pharma partnerships to deliver trials where everybody has an equal understanding of the outcomes, because ultimately what we want is data that goes into improving survival. And the discussions we have, which all seem to be at a contractual level, and the difficulties between working between pharma and academia, is just delaying. We need to get over that and we need to move forward. Now, that can happen with or without the Paediatric Medicines Regulation, but I firmly believe we need to revise the Paediatric Medicines Regulation, not completely redo it, but just amend it to make the pathway simpler, to allow pharma to really want to do drug development for rare diseases like childhood cancer, get the appropriate reward at the right time, and that way get the drugs to us to give to children at the earliest possible opportunity, and actually do the trials that not just about access at the earliest possible stage, but move on and bring them into clinical practice, which is what we really want.
Thanks, Pam. I think you're absolutely right. There is also a job to be done by us, by the academics. It is not only a political problem, a problem of legislation. It's also sometimes an issue of attitude. I would like to introduce Anne Gurs from Unite to Cure, last but not least, because I'm very curious to hear your perspective, because you, as far as I know, you are not directly involved with a child who had cancer or leukemia, but you have listened to this discussion for an extended period of time, and I would like specifically to hear from you, do you think that this is realistically moving forward?
Yes, hello. Thank you for inviting me here on stage. I'm not personally affected by a child. None of my children had whatever disease, but I'm engaged in a foundation that's private, that for 25 years is a patient advocate, helps on an everyday basis, and since last year got interested in developing or investing in research because we just thought we cannot just help children on an everyday basis without being interested in how getting better treatments. Because we are present when there's a child to be buried, we are present when there's a child to be accompanied on a daily basis. So that's when I got involved with some colleagues, with Gilles Vassal of SIOP, and discovering this feeling everything but being an expert. On the other hand, I pretty quickly felt like Chris and saying we need action. We all want action, and I think the proposals are very interesting, but I'm not the right person to give the answer if the proposals are right. I think that's the persons doing those trials, for example, the pharma. The thing that I was interested in today is knowing who is in this audience today. What are your questions? What are your oppositions? What makes that? Is there any argument that's not clear? What other arguments do you need? Are there persons in this audience that could help us bring forward? Not that I have a doubt, but I don't even know who is in this audience and that could help us push this. Because I think if I got the message clear, and again, I'm not an expert on this specific topic, I think we are all on the same side because we all want the same thing, having less children dying of cancer and having less toxicity in the drugs we have today because they're just old and they're not efficient anymore. I had just two questions I want to raise. The first one is in the US model, they included, if understood well, for political reasons, also rare diseases not being cancer in pediatrics. Is that a question that we should raise in Europe? Should we get together with other rare pediatric diseases? Is that worth it? Would that make our voice being bigger? I know because I met her just a few minutes before starting this audience that here's somebody who came here with that voice. Should that make sense? And that's your expert giving me that answer. And then, of course, like Chris said, what are the clear next steps? Because we are ready to do these next steps. And if it's in actions, if it's in thinking on new paths, we are ready for that.
Thank you very much. So who is the somebody in the audience who would like to address this issue? Because I think Anne raised an extremely important point. We are not discussing only childhood cancer. We are, of course, discussing also in this context other difficult to treat diseases in children. And you were referring to a large foundation in the US that is indeed politically carrying this forward, not only for cancer. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, an important point. Today we are here on the Childhood Cancer Day, so we talk about cancer, but I think in the political long run, we probably need to go beyond. I'm not sure if it's the day today to start this cooperation, but it needs to happen very soon. So, is the person still there? Yes. Would you like to make a statement there? Please introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Marlene Cady. I'm here on behalf of EFGCP. I'm the co-chair of the Children's Medicine Working Party. I'm an involved patient myself. I'm the founder and president of PSC Patients Europe, and primary sclerosing cholangitis is a rare liver disease, and therefore, although we are disease-based, we also are very active disease-transcending and mainly focusing on rare diseases. And that's why Anne and I had a chance to talk just a few minutes. What I'm hearing, somebody mentioned that, yes, we need medicine for the rare diseases, but indeed we first need the basic science, and that also includes getting possibly biomarkers, getting patient registries, and then link those as much as possible to find things that are the same. For instance, with PSC, they discovered 17 genes so far. I mean, for PSC, there's no cure. 17 genes, 5 are the same or are similar with cystic fibrosis, 9 are with same as multiple sclerosing. And that is moving science forward. The other thing Mr. Rousseau mentioned about the model for getting the drugs out there. And of course, in the beginning, developing a new drug costs a lot of money. And then what happens in reality is that startups want to work on biosimilars or biologic medication, but then the development is too expensive and they have a huge takeover. And that is economics. I cannot change that. It's a fact of life. But maybe we should look away from the medicine just at a very economic model. How can we make it still attractive for startups to go and look beyond, outside the box, or if they have a clue where they're going, so that it's still attractive for young or small pharmaceutical companies to start looking at a certain, often rare diseases, and then not now after 2 years you're bankrupt, and most of the time a big pharma takes over, and it's not attractive to start. So then you're losing a lot of innovative development as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Raphael, would you like to comment on this? This could be an issue in several situations that was just raised.
Yeah, so that's a very good point, how to incentivize small companies. The U.S. has this priority review voucher approach, which has indeed been issued to companies that have developed in very rare diseases, such as the one that you're describing, but not in cancer. So, at the end of the day, this was helpful for children. The companies were able to reimburse their investment and move forward. Can we apply this type of approach in Europe? Probably not, for different reasons that the working group can better explain. But I think this modular approach to incentive can also help those small companies. So I think that there is a way there. And the other thing is that the public-private partnership, I think, are a way to look at. The U.S. has developed that as well with the NCI, and this drug that we were talking about, IGF-1R inhibitor, which was developed by several companies, including Roche, it could not move forward because at the time, yes, indeed, the adult development was the driver, and we didn't have the tools to rescue, to salvage a drug that could be useful in pediatrics. We're working on that. I'm the chairman of an industry committee on the U.S. side to look at these approaches and to invite representatives from companies that have nothing to do with pharmaceutical industry to give us some ideas. So we're working on this because we don't want this to happen again. So there is momentum, not yet any solution, but I agree with you that, and I think it falls on, it's in the remit of industry to look at the business models because ultimately, even though I come from academia, I got to learn the language, and I think the economics of this is certainly going to play in favor of children with cancer. So ultimately, hopefully it's not going to take too much time.
There will be two comments, one from Magda and then from Jill.
Thank you. I'd like to support very much what Abel just said about public-private partnerships and developing business models in collaboration. I would like to give you one example, and why not applying this to pediatrics and maybe pediatric oncology in the future. In IM9, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is a public-private partnership between the European Commission and FPA, and where we enable public-private collaborations between the academic partners and large industry consortia, that actually is the model that you were mentioning before. We have a project which is looking at driving reinvestment into antibiotics, how to make it happen with the products that are not supposed to be sold, that are supposed to be preserved, and where we still need to invest a lot of money upfront in order to have them. So I think that a similar initiative, looking together at various models for various players, small and bigger, and a variety of instruments. I think some were mentioned today that came from the platform, but there could be many other models. I think this is something that we could do collectively and together. And maybe in IMI, maybe outside, but we at least have a model of collaboration in Europe that it's the biggest worldwide public-private partnership. Why not to use that platform for the future?
Yes, just a short comment. Today we are in the European Parliament, and our Parliament votes laws, and we hope very much that in 2017 the Parliament will see this pediatric medicine regulation back to the Parliament, being proposed to be amended and improved. So the message today, I think, is why this pediatric medicine regulation worked, because it works. What is working is the obligation, because pharma has to get either a PIP or a waiver approved before they file in adults. And this is the reason they wait until sometime the last minutes to submit their plan. The reward is not working, because clearly very few rewards have been granted so far. And when we discuss with our partner, what is working is the obligation. And the second message was given last week by Mr. Florent Schmidt from DG Santé in the Commission. He went to our meeting in Brussels where we were discussing all this. And he gave a very important point. The regulation is providing reward, not incentive. The regulation rewards pharma who run, develop their PIP till the end. It doesn't, and this is the Commission saying that, it doesn't incentivize. So I think when looking at the revision, how can we see some incentive? Because we see clearly that some pharma wants to do differently from the others. How can we move from something which is mainly obligation into, as I mentioned before, enabling research and development? How can we think about incentive?
I think this is very important to focus exactly on this point. So I may ask to our legislator, to Glenis, how do you see the perspective that the Parliament, within the next few months, and finally also maybe the executive, will pick on these very specific issues? The players are ready.
I think from our point of view, I said before I would have preferred this review earlier, but You know, we're told that this isn't going to happen any earlier, so we need to make sure we're well prepared. We've had good discussions today. I've had discussions with some of you previously, and we've had other seminars. Kevin and Karen Capel from Christopher Smile, I met them at this event last year, and we had a workshop with the working group, the health working group, of which I'm a co-chair, specifically on this issue. I think we have to, as parliamentarians, now keep raising this issue until we do get to the review. We have to be ready with what changes we want. We're going to try and put a resolution to the Parliament on this particular issue. And we're going to organise, I hate to say it, guys, a meeting with EMA and also with the Health Commissioner. So we want to make sure that the key people who are going to be involved in this review know exactly what we're asking for. And so when it comes to it, there's going to be no surprises. They're going to expect our suggestions, the suggestions about incentives and sanctions, or all of the things we've discussed today. And I think it's very important that as parliamentarians, we keep the pressure up to make sure that we get a review and an outcome from the review that is actually doing the job it's meant to do, which for me it doesn't seem as if the regulation is doing the job that it's meant to do at this moment in time.
Thanks very much, Glenis. One small technical question. What do you foresee in terms of timelines?
Goodness me, who knows? Well, you know, we won't even start the review till 2017. I mean, let's hope we can do it very quickly. But I've got to say that I'm the rapporteur on medical devices at the moment, and we're into the third year of that. So, you know, these things do take a long time. But if there's a will, a political will, and we get cooperation from everybody involved, that is why I say we need to have our arguments ready. We need to know what we want, and we need to get those people involved beforehand. As I said, the Health Commissioner, EMA, we need to get everybody involved so they know exactly what we're going to be looking for. And I think in that way you save a lot of time and energy, and that's certainly what I'm going to be doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think there's a statement also from the EMA. You would like to comment. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you very much. We have been following with great interest, and I would like to really go back a bit to intervention from Gilles Basal, because I think it's right to say that the regulation is very strong in terms of rewards at the end of the road. But I think, for instance, the fact that we offer free of charge scientific advice for development is something that has to be stressed, and that's used by companies very much. They have agreed a PAP or even 4. And that's something that also where we can engage also with health technology assessment bodies in order to discuss how, you know, they see the development in terms of data or the downstream assessment before the product is really available for patients. So I think there's a number of opportunities there. I think they should be publicized, because I'm fine with changing regulation that will follow, of course, the Parliament and the Council. But before that, maybe we can do still more. We can really advertise protocol assistance more. We can also see, as was said before, how PRIME, the priority medicine scheme, will serve pediatric population as well. And those incentives are there now. So maybe I agree that maybe 2016 should be an action time, not awareness anymore. We don't have to advertise those schemes, but maybe to, you know, ask companies to come more often for dialogue.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask our audience with a specific question. Pam Kearns, of course, before the audience, if she would like to make a comment.
Just a very quick comment, and I think we have to listen very, very closely to the advice of Glenis on this, and also, I mean, our EMA colleagues and the European Commission colleague who was in Brussels last week. We know, we've developed the passionate case very well, but we do need to do our homework now and build the business case, because there's clearly political and economic hurdles before we'll get the Commission to really want to do something which is not straightforward. You know, we can't minimise that changing a regulation or modifying a regulation isn't without consequences, and they're going to want to know that if we make a change, there isn't then again other unintended consequences. So we have a lot of homework to do. So I really call on particularly our colleagues in pharma to help us with data, and I know our EMA colleagues have already offered to help with the data, and I think we really need to build that case well.
Yes, I fully agree. Nevertheless, the meeting last week was a major step forward because there's a perspective, and I think that if the products of the working groups that were presented are now being reworded in legislation, action plans, I think there's a realistic chance that this can be achieved within a limited number of months. So, any other comments, please?
Martin, I've got a couple of comments. It's Kevin Capel here from Christopher Smile. A couple of things. Going back to what Chris said about a comment that was made at the CDDF, was that, oh, thanks for the information, it will open a door to talk to the decision makers. Now, I remember the BDA meeting in 2011, 4 years ago, and there were discussions then about a need for change and that we needed to talk about mechanism of action, and we're 4 years down the line and the discussion, the decision makers still aren't coming to CDDF, and it's more time. It's time that kids do not have. Children with cancer do not have time. So how can we get these decision makers actively involved in the discussion process? Because we know that we've got some regulation that needs changing. We know that. And I think it needs all stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders, decision makers, involved. And one thing that worries me from Gilles' discussion, and I'd like our EMA colleagues' view on this, is we talk about mechanism of action. At the moment, we have a problem with Article 11, which states about disease or condition. It's probably one of the most contentious articles we've got in the current regulation. Now, if we go for a mechanism of action, who's going to be the standard holder of what who or what mechanism of actions are applicable to paediatrics? And who is actually going to keep that list updated? Who's going to keep it? Now, that's going to be a really big discussion because that's going to be the basis for all the waivers, and it's exactly the issue that we've got now. So I'd love to hear what our EMA colleagues think of that question.
So I'm not sure I understand well the question, but what we can say is that, again, we're happy to explore mechanisms of action for any disease in pediatric oncology, other areas in pediatrics, and then we will look at that and try to put together the company a pediatric investigation plan according to that mechanism of action. But currently, as I said, we are working with the legal framework, which is the company starts the request with an application, and we have also to look at the conditions. So we cannot really jump that article.
It's an evaluation of the scientific evidence, and in that this evidence needs to be generated. It's something to be discussed and does involve discussions, including with academic experts, company experts. So we're looking forward to that. We only had very few occasions to do so far.
Thank you. There's one more comment from Jill.
Yes, just some information. In working group number 1 last year, we said we need to have a database of target expression in order to identify for any given drug whether or not it is relevant in pediatric malignancies. Academia has been working on this, and this will be available before summer. Second, we have been working with several companies developing voluntarily their pediatric investigation plan, and we do see some drugs that children benefit from. As an example, a BRAF inhibitor has been developed in a phase 1 trial, and children with high-grade glioma and BRAF mutated got significant response rates, sometimes for a long time. So we do see already some positive signals, and we are not only talking, we are doing. But we are not doing fast enough, and this is why we want to implement. And these are two examples and concrete examples that we all together try to act along the roads that we discuss together.
I think, Kevin, the last week's meeting made very clear why the revision is so important, because I share your feeling. I share your feeling of it could be much faster. But we have learned an important lesson last week, that there are examples in specific language in legislation in our colleagues, with our colleagues and friends in the US, that can make a difference. And we hope that this example will move this forward in addition to the steps that have been taken here in Europe. So I do not completely share your pessimism, but I understand your frustration, very much so. Chris, please.
Martin, maybe if I could briefly respond to Kevin and my off-the-cuff remark. It depends what you mean by decision makers. There's all kinds of decision makers. We've got some on the panel here before us. And EMA on Skype are clearly very important. And we saw over the summer EMA making brave attempts to work more flexibly within the current regulation. I think the conclusion most of us have come to, or the advice that most of us seem to be receiving, is that within the current regulation there cannot be the kind of moves forward that we need, we need a legal change and we need to go to the Commission. Now Glenis has set in front of us some kind of calendar. We're talking about a resolution in front of the Parliament. That won't change the law, but that will bring the discussion into the open. She's talked about approaching the Health Commissioner, perhaps going to the Deputy Commissioner, and speaking directly to those key decision makers. And I think that all of that is important. And what Pam says, building the case, having the data, having a credible process to put before those decision makers, much more work to be done on that. But if I can add something to that, in my view, what we need to do is to bring this decision out into the open. Lots of very important, very compelling presentations today, but very technical, very scientific, very legal. I think we need to find a way to make this issue something of public debate. And I would argue that the place we start with that is when this resolution goes to the Parliament. Patients' organisations like Unite to Cure, like Christopher's Smile, can take it back to the voters, the citizens, the constituents. We can start with the simple process of lobbying your MEP, but the MEPs, through the debate in the Parliament, can bring this argument alive. And when we get away from all of the scatter charts, it's very simple. It's about the life of your child, and it's about the most likely reason that your child will die of a disease is cancer. And it's something that affects people in every country, and it doesn't matter what your class is. It's something that unites people from different political parties. Whether you're rich or you're poor, if a cure has not been researched, you can't buy your way out of this. So it's something that involves every family. And if, in straightforward terms, we can make this argument public, we can make it compelling, and if the wrong decision is made by the decision makers, I think it's important that everybody knows about it and that they know that Europe is watching you. So I think that's what 2016 is about.
Mm-hmm. If I allow, just want to add something. Some of us of United Q will also go to Belgrade, where we have a big meeting in April, where there are 80 countries represented, 180 different patients, advocates or parents group. And one of our aims as United Cure, when we go there in April, is of course tell them about what we're doing, how we're doing, what are the goals, and to get them active on this topic and to get them with us, understand the topic and help us to push this to the public and to our different MAPs, because we have a whole bunch of different countries being interested in this topic, as you said, Chris. Thank you, Martin.
I think we have heard very serious and very important messages from all sides. I take this home as an important message, also as a request to be even faster, to be effective, so that we finally end up here, Kevin, without frustration, because we should be positive and supportive, and I think you and others have achieved a lot. Let me be a little bit more optimistic. I have also attended this meeting, and I was impressed to see the progress. I'm very glad that we have a very unique table here in the Parliament. We are guests. We know this, but we are now playing partners, and this is a major achievement. I would not have thought that this is possible. I thank Glenis for her major engagement in these issues. I thank all of those who have contributed. I know we are not at the end of the road. I think we will need to build coalitions with other partners from rare diseases and pediatrics. We are open for this. We will need both partnership from academia, parent groups, foundations, and industry. And Raphael, I think we can only hope that your example will be an example for the whole of industry, that this is feasible. We have to demonstrate this in the end, otherwise it will be a frustrating example. But if this is feasible, it would be a major achievement. With this, I would like to hand over to Glenis, who will give you some final remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Just before I've got an announcement to make, but just before I do, I want to say we had this discussion, many of us, Pam and others, when I was rapporteur for clinical trials, a person dealing with the clinical trials legislation. And we thought we wouldn't get anything near the sort of thing we wanted. We worked together, and it was by working together, the professionals, the patients, the NGOs, the pharmaceuticals, and the politicians, that we managed to get what I thought was a decent outcome on clinical trials. It's frustrating, I know, and it does take time. But you can only do it if you have everybody working for the same aims. That's what we've got to do now on this particular review. And the final thing is to say that the World Cancer Day events continue next week in Strasbourg. There is a reception on the 3rd of February in the evening, 6 to 7:30 for those who want to come. And that is Cancer Research UK, European Cancer League, SIOPI, and the European Cancer Organisations will be hosting that reception, and there will be a stand there from the 2nd to the 4th of February. So any of you who can attend, you will be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Last point, if the UK leaves the EU, we are really, half of the room is empty. Don't even think about it. Okay, thank you all for coming. Stay with us. Thanks for coming, thanks for joining, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.